about trauma that changed my life. He caught me in the act. He came home earlier. He caught me in the act. I did a lot of things I was not meant to do, but there's nothing I can do again. I made a mistake. Now I am facing the trauma. My name is Victoria, and I am 25 years old. I work in a small restaurant downtown. It isn't much, but I'm grateful for what I have. The name of my husband is Pascal. Pascal is 30 years old, and he is a businessman. Pascal and I have been married for over 3 years now. Pascal and I met at the restaurant where I work. It was love at first sight for him. I just liked Pascal casually initially, but as time went on, I had to just settle for him because he was very much accommodating and he had stability, which I wanted. It was like every other day, and I was working late at the restaurant when a customer came in, and it was Pascal. He was very charming, and he was a very interesting guy. We exchanged numbers, and we went on several dates. I enjoyed dating Pascal for a while. Indeed, we had our differences, like we could quarrel, argue, but we could always find our way to each other. It wasn't long Pascal had introduced me to his family. They were very lovely, and they accepted me wholeheartedly. His mother was very accommodating. It wasn't long after that before Pascal proposed to me, and we began preparing for our wedding. We got married in the most simple way. It was very beautiful. 2 months into our marriage, I found out that marriage is not a bed of roses. It was really tough at first because I was living with someone and I was seeing the person every day, so it became so boring for me. But then I spoke to Pascal about it and we worked it out. At first, Pascal didn't take it lightly. He was very disappointed at first, but through therapy sessions that we attended, we worked it out, and I knew I was not really invested like I thought. Our therapist had advised us that we should try to be very spontaneous in our relationship. So Pascal and I did all that, and we were able to rekindle our relationship. Pascal and I managed to talk our problems out, and he had informed me that it was time for us to have a child. I didn't want to be a joy killer, but I knew I wasn't ready for that, coupled with the problems we were facing. I knew that we were trying to work out our differences, but putting a child into the midst of all this was suicide. But I didn't want to address it, and so I avoided the topic. It was like every other day I was at work when I received a call from Pascal telling me that his mom was organizing a small intimate family dinner and we had to attend. I knew I was busy that day and I wouldn't be able to attend. I had to explain the situation at work to Pascal, but he didn't believe me. He kept going on and on about how I was not paying attention to him and how I was giving more importance to my work rather than giving him more attention. Pascal kept going on and on about how his family was important to him, and I was not respecting that. I just felt like Pascal was about to start something which wasn't really necessary. I loved his family and I believed they loved me too. I didn't know where all these side comments were coming from. Pascal can be very petty. He usually holds on to little things. When I knew that I was genuinely tired of everything, I had to report Pascal to his parents. I missed the dinner that his mom had planned, and I explained to them the reason why I missed the dinner. They understood where I was coming from, and they didn't make a fuss about it. I told them that Pascal had changed, and he was not the man I fell in love with and married. I told them that Pascal usually throws tantrums at every little thing, which is really exhausting. But at his parents' home, I received the biggest shock of my life. Pascal used my words against me. Pascal had left me out to dry by telling his parents that I was the problem because he had wanted children, and I was not ready to have them. Pascal threw me completely under the bus, and it wasn't fair. I thought that was our own problem that we were supposed to discuss on our own without bringing in a third party. I didn't know how to feel at that moment. His parents and his siblings began seeing me very differently. It was as if I was the one who was holding their family's happiness. But I knew within my heart I wasn't going to bring a child into the mist. Where both parents had unresolved issues, definitely the child is going to suffer for it. After that day at Pascal's home, his family had pushed me aside, but I knew that I didn't really care. I moved on with my life and I was just going about my work and my business. But I knew I had to solve the problems I had with Pascal because at the end of the day, he was my husband and I loved him. I was able to sit down with Pascal one faithful day, and I convinced him that we were going to have children one way or the other, but not right at that moment because we needed to plan things and put certain things in order. Pascal's business at that point was not doing well, and so I told him that we needed to put in extra work in order to have a good future for our child. He saw reasons with me and he agreed to it. And I actually saw the changes in Pascal. He began to look for more work because his own business wasn't really moving. I was somehow happy because I felt like finally my husband, who I had dated, was back to me. I knew it was a step in the right direction, even if I knew I was deceiving him then. I was really ready to have a child, but if this lie I was telling could bring the Pascal I knew once before, I was fine with it. Pascal and I did a lot of activities together. We went on dates, and he made me happy in a lot of ways. Pascal was invited to a colleague's wedding anniversary party, and he decided to take me along. It was a nice party. We danced at the party. I got to meet some of his friends who are close to him, and they received me so nicely. I got to mingle at the party. I met some amazing group of girls there. We immediately clicked and we became friends. We planned to meet up after the party, and we did. We met up at a nice place and we talked about a lot of things. They were all radiating positive energy, which I somehow needed at that point. We talked about everything. The one I was very close to was Esther. Esther was very easygoing, very loud, and very beautiful. It was really nice to get to know her. At that point, she was already my best friend. I felt like she understood me, and I also understood her. I had finally found someone I could speak to, because there are days I want to just rant to someone in order for me to be relieved. I was happy because Esther was already my friend. She was just a funny soul. It was like every other day, and I was trying to get hold of Pascal because he had traveled for work and he was out of town. When I got hold of him, we talked for some time, and I got ready for work. On getting there, I found out that there had been a fire outbreak at the restaurant, and immediately I became very exhausted. This restaurant had been able to put food on my table ever since I was in college, and the old couple that had the restaurant meant a lot to me. I went home and I began to cry because I knew that I had lost my job and there was no hope of getting another one. I immediately tried to reach Pascal, but it was not connecting, and I decided to call Esther. She came as soon as she could, and I was very happy because she gave me a lot of comfort. She was able to cheer me up, and I was somehow relieved. I trusted Esther to make me laugh. It wasn't long when Pascal had called me. I explained everything to him, and he also comforted me, telling me he was going to come very soon so he could be with me. Weeks after the incident, when Pascal had returned, he told me that he was going to look for another job for me, but I had already started looking for another job. I didn't want to depend on my husband for anything, and I knew that he was happy about that. He wanted me to just stay home and be a housewife. So when he told me he had been looking for a job for me, I didn't really believe him. With the help of Esther, I was able to get another job. The pay wasn't much, but it was definitely okay. At least I wasn't going to be just staying at home. I decided to go see the old couple that owned the restaurant that got burnt, and I sympathized with them because somehow they had become my family. A few months later, I was already settling into my new job. It was going smoothly, and Esther had told me she wanted to take me and my husband to dinner. I accepted the invitation and I told Pascal about it. He had never met Esther, but I had told him a lot about her. I introduced them on that day and we got right into ordering our food. I excused myself to go to the restroom when I bumped into a guy coming out from the men's room. I apologized immediately and he told me to forget about it. He complimented me and our conversation started from there. He told me he was into the restaurant business and I decided to exchange numbers with him. He told me his name was Elijah. We talked for some minutes and Esther came looking for me and I had to leave. I went to the restroom and came out. Esther asked me about Elijah and I brushed it off. We had dinner and we talked for a while. The next day I received a call from Elijah inviting me to his restaurant in order for me to check a few things. After work I went over there and I was amazed. Elijah was really into the restaurant business and he was also a chef. He showed me around and his restaurant was really lovely. Elijah told me that he was looking to expand, and since I had experience in the field, he wanted me to work at his new branch. I told him that he didn't know me and he was planning to entrust his business in my hand. He told me I was good at it and that he believed in me. I told Elijah that I was going to think about it and get back to him. I went home very happy and I told my husband about it. Pascal wasn't happy that a random guy was about to help me. I told him that he should be very happy for me because I saw a job that was going to pay me good money. He told me he was only going to allow me to take the job if I let him meet Elijah. I told him that it wasn't his decision to make, but in order for peace to reign and for my own peace of mind, I decided to ask Elijah if he would want to meet up with my husband before I could accept the job. Elijah agreed, and he told me when he was going to be less busy, and I set up the meeting. Elijah made me draw out the menu for the restaurant, and preparation was underway. I did everything needed for the opening of the restaurant, down to the decor, the cottons, and all. It felt like I was opening my own restaurant. It felt so surreal. Elijah and Pascal finally met, and I was grateful to Elijah for putting the mind of Pascal at rest because he thought there was something going on between me and Elijah. But Elijah was just straightforward, and he told Pascal that it was just business, nothing more. We opened the restaurant, and it was very beautiful. People loved our food, and they kept tripping. Overall, it was really good. Money was coming in, and Elijah was very happy. He gave me a huge salary and a good bonus. I was really grateful because it looked like a dream come true. A few weeks after the opening, Elijah had told me he wanted to take me out to celebrate because I had brought more money for him through the branch I was heading to. I was also very happy because everything about me changed completely. I could afford anything I wanted, and it looked like my husband wasn't happy for me. He was always so cold to me anytime I was discussing work or anything related to Elijah. He could always say he was not interested. And when I told him about the dinner that Elijah had invited me to, he became very angry, and I didn't really care because it was my turn to shine and I wasn't going to let anyone dim it. I got ready and I left for dinner. I came outside and there was a car waiting for me. I felt so happy and I left for the dinner. Elijah and I met up and I told him how grateful I was for the pampering, and he told me it was nothing. We had a lovely dinner, the food was nice and the ambience was wonderful. A few minutes into the dinner, Elijah kept moving in a certain way that I didn't understand. He was very gentle with me and I brushed it off because he had told my husband that he didn't see me as anything more than just a friend. I went home that day and I didn't find Pascal at home. I called his phone, but it was unreachable. I became worried because it was unlike him to switch off his phone. I decided not to panic, and so I called Esther to talk to her about how I spent my evening. She had told me how happy she was for me and how jealous of all the fun I was having without her. Esther had traveled for the weekend to go see her mom. The next day, Pascal came home smelling like cheap perfume and alcohol. I asked him where he had been all night, and he told me it wasn't any of my business. I didn't know when I started crying because I knew he had cheated on me, because I knew deep in my gut. I didn't know where I had gone wrong to be treated in such a way by my husband. That day, I went to work feeling so low. I decided not to let that weigh me down, and I went so hard at work. I occupied my mind till it was time for lunch when I received a bundle of flowers from someone. At first, I thought it was Pascal that was trying to apologize to me, but when I saw that it wasn't from him, I was a little bit disappointed. But I received a call from Elijah asking me if I liked the flowers. I was a little bit cheered up by his gesture, and I thanked him for it. I went about with the rest of the day, and when it was time for me to go home, I went home and I saw Pascal passed out on the ground. I immediately called for help, and he was taken to the hospital. I was very worried about him. A few hours later, the doctor had told me it was an alcohol overdose and he should stay away from alcohol for some time. The Pascal family came as soon as they could, and I explained everything to them too. We were all waiting for him to regain consciousness. I was exhausted from work, but I had no choice but to stay at the hospital overnight. I called Elijah and told him about what was happening and that I was going to take some time off to take care of him. He agreed, and I found one of my assistants to take care of the restaurant before I resumed. A couple of hours later, Pascal woke up and the doctors checked on him and they said he was okay to go home. They asked me to take very good care of him and that he should stay off alcohol for some time. We went home and I had to have a sit-down talk with Pascal and his parents. They asked him the reason why he had resulted in drinking. He said that his business was doing well and that he was very broke. I had to explain to him that that shouldn't give him the right to drink himself to death. But he wouldn't even listen to me and his parents weren't helpful, so I excused myself. The next day I had a conversation with him that I was able to convince Elijah to give him a push in the right direction, and he was going to get the job, but he said I shouldn't do anything like that, and that he was not going to accept anything from Elijah. He got angry and walked out of the house. I decided that I was going to invite Elijah over in order for him to talk sense into Pascal, but as I was trying to reach him, it wasn't going through. After a few hours, he called me and he told me he was free and he could show up to my house in the evening. I kept on waiting for Pascal, but he didn't show. Out of frustration, I decided to have a few drinks. Elijah came over and I explained everything that had been happening to him and how my husband needed help. He agreed to help Pascal and I was happy. Far into our conversation, I discovered that I was already tipsy. One thing left to another and Elijah and I kissed. It escalated from that to us ending up on the bed. I was so lost in what we were doing that I didn't know that Pascal had walked in. Pascal dragged Elijah and they both started fighting. I started screaming and calling our neighbors for help. The fight ended up with Pascal severely injured. I tried to help him, but he refused my help. Pascal asked me to leave the house because he needed space, and I respected his decision and I left with Elijah. Pascal can be very destructive if he is angry as we were leaving. I could hear him destroying things and I immediately felt bad. I did want to think about my marriage at that point because I knew it was a lot to take in at once. I asked Elijah if he genuinely had feelings for me and he said he did. The next day I went about my work in the restaurant. Elijah was kind enough to open the doors of his house to me. I was planning that by the end of work I could go back home to get a few of my things. I got there and I met Pascal's family there and they were all insulting about how I was very cheap and all. I tried to get to Pascal in order for me to speak with him, but they wouldn't let me. It was all too exhausting, and so I decided I was going to have a conversation with him if he was alone. A few days later, I received a package, and inside were my divorce papers. I didn't know where I started crying. I tried to call Pascal, and when he picked, he threatened me on how he was going to make my life very miserable. He had told me he was going to make me regret ever cheating on him. I told him that I didn't mean to cheat and that it was all a mistake, but he ignored me and he switched off his phone. I went to Elijah's house that day and I cried like never before. My foolishness had made me lose my marriage. I started to regret all the wrong decisions I made regarding my relationship and marriage to Pascal. The following day, I went to our house and I was told that the house had already been sold. I called Pascal, but he ignored my calls. I was able to track him down to his family house, and at that place I begged Pascal to please reconsider and also for us to work out our differences. But all my pleadings went to deaf ears. I went back to Elijah's house telling him I was already tired of crying and that it was time for me to sign the divorce papers and never look back. I got a lawyer and he went through it, and we discovered that Pascal was planning to take everything we built all for himself. The house we bought he sold without telling me, and now all the properties we acquired together he took everything for himself, and he left me nothing. I told my lawyers that I was not ready to fight any divorce. I signed the papers and I was done with Pascal and his baggage, and I was freed. I moved on from him and I concentrated on expanding my restaurant business, which was growing with the help of Elijah. Update. Hello guys, so I was able to leave the marriage without anything. Everything I ever worked for Pascal claimed it was all his, and he didn't leave anything to me. I didn't want to fight him because honestly I was exhausted. His drama was too much. Pascal held on to something that had happened while I was drunk, and he refused to forgive me. I genuinely loved Pascal and I was trying to make our relationship work. I didn't plan for what happened, but it did. I made up my mind that I wasn't just going to take a step back and wallow. I decided to make something good out of everything. Elijah and I agreed that it was okay for us to just stay friends and not compromise our work relationship. He apologized for how the marriage turned out, and I told him it wasn't his fault. We have remained friends ever since, and together we have opened more restaurants. Pascal's revenge on me was so cruel, he literally turned everything against me. Sometimes the trauma is so fresh in my head, I wished I never got into any form of relationship with Pascal. He was very cruel to me, and I knew I didn't deserve any of that.